The dust settled slow across the valley that evening, like God himself was laying down a blanket over the ranch. 23-year-old Eli stood at the edge of the wooden fence, his slender fingers gripping the worn rail as he watched the sun dip behind the mountains. He'd been married to the McKenna twins for 3 months now. Still, his heart hadn't quite settled into the rhythm of this new life. The arrangement had been unconventional from the start, a solution born of desperation and land disputes that Eli barely understood even now. His father's debts, the McKenna family's need for an heir to secure their claim, and Eli's own quiet acceptance of who he was had all collided into this strange, beautiful, terrifying reality behind him. The ranch house glowed warm with lamplight, and Eli could hear the low rumble of voices inside. Cade and Carter McKenna, identical in appearance, but vastly different in temperament, were finishing up the day's work. At 28, both brothers carried themselves with the confident ease of men who'd spent their entire lives working this land. Cade was the gentler of the two, thoughtful and measured in his words, while Carter burned with an intensity that sometimes made Eli's breath catch in his throat. They'd been patient with him, more patient than Eli had any right to expect. But he could feel the tension building like storm clouds on a summer day. The marriage had been chaste so far, a fact that both relieved and troubled Eli in equal measure. He was a virgin in every sense that mattered. The thought of intimacy with one man was overwhelming enough, without adding a second into the equation. But he'd seen the way Cade and Carter looked at him sometimes, when they thought he wasn't paying attention. There was hunger there, yes, but also something softer, something that made Eli's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He'd grown up believing he'd never find love, never find acceptance, and yet here he was, on this remote Wyoming ranch, with 2 men who'd sworn before God and witnesses to honor and protect him. "Supper's ready." Cade's voice came from the porch, gentle as always, and Eli turned to see him standing in the doorway with his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Even in the fading light, Eli could see the concern in Cade's gray eyes. The older man always seemed to know when Eli's thoughts turned dark. When the weight of their situation pressed too heavy on his narrow shoulders, Eli managed a small smile and made his way back to the house, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Inside, the smell of beef stew and fresh bread wrapped around him like a warm embrace. And for a moment he could almost pretend this was normal, that he belonged here. Carter was already seated at the table, his long legs stretched out and his hat hanging on the back of his chair. Where Cade's hair was neatly trimmed, Carter wore his just a touch longer, and there was usually a shadow of stubble on his jaw that Cade never allowed on his own face. It was one of the few ways Eli could tell them apart at a glance, though he was getting better at reading the subtle differences in their expressions and mannerisms. Carter's eyes found his immediately, and Eli felt that familiar flutter in his stomach, part nervousness, part something else entirely. "Long day?" Carter asked, his voice carrying that rough edge that Eli had come to associate with barely contained emotion. The younger twin had a way of looking at Eli that made him feel both exposed and cherished, like Carter could see straight through to his soul and liked everything he found there. Eli nodded as he took his seat between the brothers, the arrangement they'd fallen into naturally over these past months. It felt symbolic somehow, Eli caught between these 2 forces of nature, trying to find his own footing while being pulled in 2 directions at once. Cade served the stew with practiced efficiency, making sure Eli's bowl was filled first before attending to his own and Carter's portions. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Eli had learned that the McKenna brothers didn't fill silence with meaningless chatter. They were men of action, not words, and when they did speak it usually meant something. So when Cade cleared his throat and set down his spoon, Eli's pulse immediately quickened. "Eli, we need to talk about something," Cade began, his tone careful and measured. Beside him, Eli felt Carter tense slightly, and he knew whatever was coming had been discussed between the brothers already. "We've been patient, and will continue to be patient as long as you need, but Carter and we're concerned that maybe we're making you uncomfortable, that maybe you're having second thoughts about this arrangement." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eli's first instinct was to deny it, to reassure them, but the truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. It's not that, Eli said quietly, pushing his stew around his bowl without really seeing it. I don't know how this is supposed to work. He trailed off, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. Even after 3 months of marriage, these conversations still made him feel like an awkward child rather than a grown man. Carter reached over and placed his calloused hand over Eli's smaller one, the touch sending electricity up Eli's arm. "We know," Carter said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone usually so intense. "And we're not rushing you. But Eli, you have to understand, this is hard for us too. Being close to you every day, sleeping in separate rooms, pretending we don't want." He stopped himself. Jaw clenching with the effort of restraint, Cade picked up where his twin left off, his gray eyes serious and kind. "What Carter's trying to say is that we care about you, Eli, more than we probably should after only 3 months. This started as a business arrangement, a way to solve problems for both our families, but it's become something else. At least for us." He paused, reaching out to tilt Eli's chin up gently so their eyes met. "We want to know what you're feeling, what you want. Because we can't keep guessing, and we can't keep walking on eggshells, wondering if we're going to scare you off." Eli's heart hammered in his chest as he looked between the two brothers, seeing his own uncertainty reflected back at him, along with something warmer, something that made his breath catch. What did he want? He'd spent so long just trying to survive, to make it through each day without disappointing someone or confirming everyone's worst assumptions about him, that he'd never really stopped to consider what he actually wanted for himself. But sitting here between Cade and Carter, feeling the warmth of their attention and their genuine concern, Eli realized that maybe what he wanted was already right here in front of him. "I'm scared," Eli admitted, the words coming out barely louder than a whisper. "I'm scared of disappointing you both. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared of—" He swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "I'm scared of wanting this too much, of letting myself feel things that might not be real, that might just be because of the situation we're in." There, he'd said it, the truth that had been gnawing at him for weeks now. He'd been falling for both of them in different ways and at different speeds. And it terrified him because he couldn't imagine a scenario where this ended well. Carter's hand tightened on his. And when Eli looked up, he saw something fierce and protective in the younger twin's expression. "Eli, nothing about what I feel for you is because of some arrangement or land deal. I wanted you the first time I saw you in town, before any of this marriage business was even discussed. And every day since then has only made it stronger." The raw honesty in Carter's voice made Eli's chest ache. Cade nodded in agreement, his own hand coming to rest on Eli's shoulder, grounding and warm. "We're not asking you to have everything figured out," Cade added softly. "We're just asking you to be honest with us and with yourself. If you need more time, we'll give it to you. If you want to take things slow, we'll follow your pace. But Eli, we need to know if there's a future here, if you can see yourself truly being with us, because Carter and I—" He glanced at his twin, and something unspoken passed between them. "We're already in too deep to pretend this is just business anymore." The weight of their words settled over Eli like a heavy coat, both comforting and constraining. He thought about the past 3 months, the small kindnesses, the careful distance they'd maintained, the way they both looked at him like he was something precious and rare. He thought about the loneliness he'd felt his whole life. Always on the outside looking in, always too different to fit anywhere. And he thought about the warmth that had started to bloom in his chest whenever he was near them. The way his body responded to their proximity, even when his mind was still catching up. "I can see it," Eli said finally, his voice stronger now. "A future here, I mean. With both of you. I just don't know how to." He gestured vaguely, embarrassment flooding through him again. "I've never been with anyone, and the thought of being with both of you at the same time is ... Couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words for the confusing mix of desire and anxiety that churned in his gut. Carter and Cade exchanged another glance, and then Cade stood, moving around behind Eli's chair. "It doesn't have to be both of us at the same time," Cade murmured, his hands coming to rest gently on Eli's shoulders. "Not if that's too much. We're not trying to overwhelm you, Eli. We just want to love you in whatever way you'll allow." The word love hung in the air, and Eli's breath caught. Carter was watching him intently from across the table, and slowly he stood as well, coming around to kneel beside Eli's chair so they were at eye level. "Let us show you," Carter said quietly, his hand coming up to cup Eli's face with surprising tenderness. "Tonight, no pressure, no expectations. Just let us show you what this could be like." His thumb brushed across Eli's cheekbone, and Eli found himself leaning into the touch despite his nervousness. Behind him, Cade's hands began to massage gently at the tight muscles in his shoulders, and Eli felt some of the tension begin to drain away. They were asking for permission, waiting for his consent. And that realization made something shift inside him.
Okay.
Eli breathed, and he saw the flash of surprise and joy in Carter's eyes. Felt Cade's hands still for just a moment before continuing their soothing motion. "Show me." It was a leap of faith, a surrender to something he'd been fighting for months. And as Carter leaned in to press the softest kiss to his lips, Eli felt like he was finally coming home. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving Eli every opportunity to pull away. But instead, he found himself leaning in, his inexperienced lips moving against Carter's with growing confidence. When they finally broke apart, Eli was breathless and flushed, his heart racing. Cade's hands slid around to turn Eli's face toward him, and then it was the older twin's turn to kiss him. This one just as tender, but somehow different, more patient, more deliberate. Eli was caught between them, surrounded by their warmth and their desire. And for the first time since this whole arrangement had begun, he felt like he might actually belong here. Like this might actually work. "Let's move somewhere more comfortable," Cade suggested when the kiss ended, his voice rougher than usual. Carter helped Eli to his feet. Together, the three of them made their way toward the bedroom that Eli had been occupying alone for the past 3 months. The marriage bed, as it were, though it had never served that purpose until now. Eli's legs felt shaky, his whole body thrumming with nervous energy and anticipation. At the doorway, he paused, looking back at both brothers with uncertainty written across his features. "We've got you," Carter promised, reading his hesitation. "Every step of the way. If anything feels wrong or you want to stop, you just say the word." Cade nodded his agreement, and the sincerity in both their faces made Eli's chest tight with emotion. They truly did care about him, about his comfort and his feelings. This wasn't just about satisfying their own desires. They wanted him to feel safe, to feel cherished. And that realization gave Eli the courage to step through the doorway and into whatever came next. The bedroom was bathed in soft lamplight, casting long shadows across the simple furnishings. Eli had always thought it a lonely room, too big for just one person. But now, with Cade and Carter here, it felt different, warmer, more alive. Carter closed the door behind them, while Cade moved to turn up the lamp slightly. Neither of them rushing, both giving Eli time to adjust. Eli stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "No, come here," Cade said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed and patting the space beside him. Eli moved on unsteady legs, sitting where indicated, and immediately felt Carter settle on his other side. They were bracketing him again, but instead of feeling trapped, Eli felt protected. Cade's hand came to rest on his knee, while Carter's arm draped across his shoulders, and they just sat like that for a moment. The three of them breathing in sync. "There's no rush," Cade murmured, his thumb tracing small circles on Eli's knee through the fabric of his pants. "We have all night." All the time in the world, Carter pressed a kiss to Eli's temple, his stubble scratching lightly against Eli's skin. And Eli found himself relaxing by degrees. These were the same men he'd been living with for months, eating meals with, working alongside. The context had changed, but they hadn't. They were still the patient, caring, protective men they'd always been. "Can I?" Eli started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase what he wanted. Carter's hand came up to thread through his hair, the touch soothing and grounding. "What is it?" the younger twin prompted gently. Eli took a breath, steeling himself. "Can I touch you? Both of you. I want to. I need to not feel like this is just happening to me." The vulnerability in his own voice surprised him, but neither brother seemed taken aback. Instead, Cade smiled, warm and encouraging. Of course you can, Cade said, taking Eli's hand and placing it over his heart. Through the fabric of Cade's shirt, Eli could feel the steady, strong beat, slightly elevated from normal. Cade was nervous too, Eli realized with some surprise. These two confident, capable men were nervous about being with him. Carter guided Eli's other hand to his own chest. And Eli marveled at the difference. Carter's heart was racing, pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. They were all in this together, all taking the same leap. Emboldened. Eli let his hands explore, running over the broad planes of their chests, feeling the muscles beneath the fabric. Both brothers stayed still, letting him set the pace, and their restraint made Eli brave. He began working at the buttons of Cade's shirt, his fingers clumsy with nervousness and anticipation. Cade helped when Eli got stuck, shrugging out of the garment to reveal sun-bronzed skin and a dusting of dark hair across his chest. Eli had seen both brothers shirtless before while they worked, but this felt different, intimate, and personal. In a way that made his mouth go dry, Carter was already working on his own buttons. And soon both twins were bare-chested before him. They were mirror images, identical right down to the small scar on their left shoulder from some childhood mishap they'd told him about. But as Eli's hands explored, he found small differences. Carter's skin was slightly warmer, and there was a small birthmark on his right rib cage that Cade didn't have. These small variations made them real, made them individual rather than interchangeable. And Eli found himself cataloging each one like precious secrets. "Your turn," Carter murmured, and before Eli could protest or overthink it, gentle hands were working at his own buttons. He wanted to hide, suddenly self-conscious about his body, smaller, slighter, less impressive than either of theirs. But Cade's hands stilled his, holding firm but not restraining. "You're beautiful," Cade said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Eli's throat tight. "Every part of you." Carter made a sound of agreement as Eli's shirt joined the others on the floor. And then there were hands on his skin, warm and calloused and reverent. The next hour passed in a blur of sensation and discovery. True to their word, Cade and Carter took their time, introducing Eli to pleasure so slowly and carefully that he thought he might die from the anticipation. They mapped every inch of his skin with their hands and mouths, finding spots that made him gasp and shiver, building him up and then backing off before he could get overwhelmed. Through it all, they narrated what they were doing, asking permission, making sure Eli was comfortable, and consenting at every step. When things progressed to the point where Eli thought his inexperience might become a problem, Cade was there with patience and guidance, talking him through everything in that calm, steady voice. Carter's intensity provided the perfect counterbalance, his passion igniting something wild in Eli that he hadn't known existed. Together, they created a harmony that shouldn't have worked. Two very different approaches that somehow complemented each other perfectly. And Eli was the beneficiary, caught between them and rising higher than he'd ever imagined possible. The actual act. When it finally came, was Carter who initiated it. With Cade's full blessing and participation, Carter took his time preparing Eli, working with a patience that belied his usually impulsive nature. While Cade held Eli and whispered reassurances and praise, the brief pain gave way to something else entirely, and as Carter moved with him, Eli understood finally what all the poetry and songs had been trying to capture. This was intimacy, true connection, and the fact that Cade was there too, touching, encouraging, participating only made it more intense. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed. Eli between the twins with his head on Cade's chest and Carter's arm thrown possessively across his waist. His body ached in unfamiliar ways, but the discomfort was overshadowed by a bone-deep satisfaction and contentment. For the first time in his life, Eli felt truly seen, truly wanted, truly enough. The silence that stretched between them was comfortable, broken only by the sound of their breathing gradually returning to normal. "That was ... Eli started, then stopped, unable to find adequate words. Carter chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where it pressed against Eli's back. "Yeah," he agreed simply. Cade's fingers carded through Eli's hair, the touch soothing and affectionate. "You okay?" Cade asked, always the caretaker. Eli nodded, then realized he should probably use words. "More than okay," he murmured. "That was perfect." "You both were perfect." "Not perfect," Carter corrected, pressing a kiss to Eli's shoulder. "But maybe perfect for each other." The sentiment was sweet coming from someone who usually dealt in facts and actions rather than feelings and words. Eli felt his chest tighten with emotion, and he had to blink rapidly against the sting in his eyes. How had he gotten so lucky? How had he ended up here in this impossible situation that somehow felt more right than anything else in his life ever had? Cade must have sensed his emotional shift because he tilted Eli's face up to meet his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. Eli shook his head, a watery smile crossing his face. "Nothing's wrong," he assured them both. "Everything's right. That's what's making me emotional. I never thought I'd have any of this. A home, acceptance, love." The words slipped out before he could stop it, and he felt both brothers still. "I love you both," Eli continued, figuring he might as well commit now that he'd started. "I probably have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." The joy that lit up Carter's face was almost blinding. And Cade's expression softened into something so tender it made Eli's heart ache. "We love you too," Cade said, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of us. We have since before the wedding, if I'm being honest." Carter nodded, his arm tightening around Eli. "You're stuck with us now," he said, trying for levity, but not quite masking the depth of feeling beneath. "Hope you know what you've gotten yourself into." Eli laughed, the sound free and genuine. And for the first time, he felt like maybe he did know, and maybe that was exactly what he wanted. They dozed for a while. The three of them wrapped around each other in a configuration that shouldn't have been comfortable, but somehow was. Eli woke first, the moon now high enough to cast silver light through the bedroom window. He studied the faces of his sleeping husbands, because that's what they were now. Truly and completely, and marveled at how peaceful they looked. Carter's usual intensity was smoothed away in sleep, while Cade's careful composure had given way to a slight smile. They were both beautiful, and they were both his. Carefully, trying not to wake either of them, Eli extracted himself from the tangle of limbs and made his way to the window. Outside, the ranch spread out in shades of silver and shadow, peaceful and beautiful. This was home now, he realized. Not just the physical place, but the people in it, the life they were building together. It wouldn't always be easy, he knew that. There would be challenges ahead, questions about how to make this unconventional arrangement work in a world that often didn't understand or accept difference. But standing here, feeling the echo of Carter's touch still on his skin and Cade's words still in his heart, Eli thought maybe they had a fighting chance. Couldn't sleep? Cade's voice came soft from the bed, and Eli turned to see him propped up on one elbow, watching with those gentle gray eyes. Eli shook his head, moving back toward the bed. "Just thinking," he said, climbing back under the covers. Cade pulled him close, and within moments Carter had unconsciously adjusted to drape himself over both of them. "About what?" Cade prompted, his hand resuming its soothing motion through Eli's hair. "About how this is going to work," Eli admitted. "Out there, I mean, beyond this room. People are going to have opinions, and not all of them will be kind." It was something he'd been worrying about since the beginning. This question of how they'd present themselves to the world. Cade was quiet for a moment, considering. "Let them talk," he said finally. "We're not hurting anyone, and what happens in our home is our business. Anyone who has a problem with how we choose to live can take it up with me." The steel in his usually gentle voice surprised Eli. Carter stirred, apparently more awake than Eli had realized. "Cade's right," he mumbled, his face pressed against Eli's back. "Besides, half the town already thinks we're strange for the whole arrangement anyway. Might as well give them something real to talk about." There was humor in his tone, and Eli found himself smiling despite his worries. Maybe it was that simple, just choosing to live their truth and letting the chips fall where they may. They had each other, and maybe that was enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright. and Eli woke to find himself alone in the big bed. For a moment, panic flared. Had it all been a dream? But then he registered the soreness in his body, the rumpled sheets, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Real then? All of it real. He dressed quickly, suddenly eager to see them both, to confirm that nothing had changed in the light of day. When he emerged, he found Cade at the stove making breakfast while Carter sat at the table working on some ranch paperwork. Both looked up when he entered, and the smiles that broke across their faces were identical and warm. "Morning," Cade said, his eyes doing a quick scan to make sure Eli was okay. "How are you feeling?" It was such a loaded question, but Eli understood what he was really asking. "Good," Eli said honestly, moving to pour himself coffee. "Really good." Carter stood, coming to press a kiss to Eli's temple in a casual show of affection that felt both new and completely natural. "Good," he echoed, satisfaction clear in his voice. They fell into an easy rhythm, the three of them moving around the kitchen like they'd been doing this forever. Breakfast was a relaxed affair, with conversation flowing more freely than it had in weeks. The tension that had been building for months was gone, replaced by a new intimacy that colored every interaction. When Cade's hand brushed Eli's, it lingered. When Carter met Eli's eyes across the table, there was no hiding the warmth there. This was their new normal, and Eli found he liked it very much. After breakfast, there was work to be done. There was always work on a ranch. But as they prepared to head out for the day, Carter pulled Eli aside for a moment. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and intense, "I think Cade wants his turn with you. If you're comfortable with that." The directness of it made Eli flush, but he nodded. The idea of being with Cade one-on-one, of discovering what that dynamic would be like without Carter's intensity, was both nerve-wracking and appealing. Carter grinned at his agreement, pressing another quick kiss to his lips. "Good," he said, "and then maybe tomorrow night you can have us both again." Eli spent the day in a daze, helping with the horses and trying not to think too much about the night to come. But his mind kept wandering, remembering the tenderness of Cade's touch, the patience of his guidance. Where Carter burned hot and fast, Cade was a slow simmer, and Eli found himself curious about what that would mean in the context of intimacy. The day seemed to drag and fly by simultaneously, and before he knew it, they were sitting down to dinner again, this time when the meal ended. It was Cade who stood and extended his hand to Eli. Carter gave them both an encouraging smile and announced he'd handle the dishes. And Eli found himself being led back to the bedroom with his heart in his throat. Once the door was closed behind them, Cade turned to face him, his expression serious but warm. "I want you to know," he started, "that you can always say no. To me, to Carter, to both of us. This doesn't change our commitment to you. And consent isn't something you give once and then it's assumed forever." The speech was so perfectly Cade thoughtful and considerate to a fault that Eli found himself smiling. "I know," he said, stepping closer. "And I want this. I want you." The words seemed to be what Cade needed to hear, because the last of his restraint melted away. Unlike the previous night with Carter's passionate intensity, Cade took his time, worshipping every inch of Eli with a devotion that bordered on reverent. His touch was confident but gentle, guiding rather than demanding. And Eli found himself responding in ways he hadn't even with Carter, where Carter had been fire. Cade was warmth, steady and all-encompassing. He talked Eli through everything with that calm, measured voice, praising and encouraging, making Eli feel like the most precious thing in the world. When they finally came together, it was slower, more deliberate, and somehow even more intense for the drawn-out anticipation. Cade watched Eli's face the entire time, reading every expression, adjusting to make sure Eli's pleasure was at the forefront. It was intimate in a different way than the night before, and Eli realized that this was the beauty of what they had, two very different types of love and connection that somehow completed rather than competed with each other. Afterward, Cade held him close, pressing kisses to his forehead and murmuring soft words of affection. "You're incredible," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what we did to deserve you, but I'm grateful every day that you're here." Eli felt tears prick at his eyes again, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling these men had for him. "I'm the lucky one," he whispered back, meaning every word. They stayed like that until Carter knocked softly and asked if he could join them, and then it was back to the three of them. Tangled together in the big bed like it was the most natural thing in the world, the days turned into weeks. And slowly but surely, Eli found his footing in this new dynamic. Some nights it was just him and Carter, all passion and intensity. Other nights Cade would claim him with gentle reverence. And increasingly, there were nights when both brothers shared him, and Eli discovered pleasures he'd never even imagined. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, discovered what worked and what didn't, and built an intimacy that felt uniquely theirs. But it wasn't just about the physical, Eli realized. In the quiet moments, working side by side, sharing meals, discussing ranch business, they were becoming something more than just husbands in a legal sense. They were becoming partners, a unit, a family. Cade's careful planning balanced Carter's impulsive energy, and Eli found himself serving as a bridge between them, understanding both perspectives and helping them communicate when their different approaches clashed. He wasn't just the recipient of their attention, he was an active participant in building something real and lasting. There were challenges, of course. About 6 weeks after that first night together, they had to make their first public appearance as a married unit at a town social. Eli had been dreading it, anticipating judgment and whispered conversations. And there was some of that he'd felt the weight of curious and sometimes hostile stares. But there were also knowing smiles from some of the older women, accepting nods from a few of the men, and a couple who quietly congratulated them and mentioned that love was love, no matter what form it took. The bigger challenge came from an unexpected source: jealousy. Not from Eli, who found he had more than enough love and attention from both brothers, but between the twins themselves. It started small, with Carter making a snide comment about how Cade got more alone time with Eli. Then Cade fired back about how Carter was monopolizing Eli's affection. Things came to a head one evening when Eli walked in on them arguing in the barn, their voices raised in a way he'd never heard before. "What's going on?" Eli demanded, and both brothers fell silent, looking guilty. After some prodding, the truth came out. They were both worried about not being enough for Eli individually, about him preferring one over the other. It would have been laughable if they hadn't been so genuinely distressed. "You're both idiots," Eli said, affection tempering the words. "You think I could choose between you? You're like two halves of the same whole. I need both of you, in different ways. Carter, you make me feel alive and passionate. Cade, you make me feel safe and cherished. Together, you make me feel complete." His speech seemed to break the tension, and after a moment, both brothers laughed, the sound a bit sheepish. "We're being ridiculous, aren't we?" Cade said, running a hand through his hair. Carter nodded, looking chagrined. "Completely ridiculous," he agreed. Eli moved to stand between them, taking both their hands. "We need to communicate better," he said firmly. "All three of us. If something's bothering you, say it. Don't let it fester. It only works if we're honest with each other." It was a turning point, that conversation, and things got easier after that. As autumn turned toward winter, Eli found himself settling into ranch life in ways he never had before. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was actively engaged, learning everything he could about running the operation. Cade taught him about the business side, how to manage accounts, and plan for different seasons. Carter showed him the physical work, how to handle livestock and maintain equipment. And slowly, Eli began to feel like a real partner in the ranch. It's not just an accessory to their lives. The nights grew colder, and the three of them took to sleeping in one bed as a matter of course rather than arrangement. Eli loved waking up, surrounded by warmth, loved the lazy morning conversations before they had to face the day. He loved the way Carter would nuzzle into his neck, still half asleep, and the way Cade's arms would tighten around him protectively. These small intimacies, more than even the passionate nights, made Eli feel like he'd truly found home. Around the 4-month mark, something shifted in Eli. The last of his uncertainty fell away, and he realized with stunning clarity that this was forever. Not because of some legal contract or family obligation, but because he genuinely, deeply loved these men and the life they were building together. That realization gave him a confidence he'd never had before, and both brothers noticed the change. "You're different lately," Carter observed one evening, his head in Eli's lap as they relaxed by the fire, more settled. "Ow. It's nice to see." Cade, who was reading in his favorite chair, looked up with a smile. "He's finally realized what we've known all along," he said, his eyes twinkling. "That he belongs here, with us." Eli laughed, running his fingers through Carter's hair. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just finally started believing I deserved to be happy." The statement hung in the air, profound despite its simplicity. Both brothers made sounds of protest, but Eli shook his head. "I spent so long thinking there was something wrong with me, that I'd never find people who could accept all of me. You two didn't just accept me, you celebrated every part of me, even the parts I was scared of." The conversation turned deeper, all three of them sharing their fears and hopes for the future. Cade admitted he worried sometimes about the legal precariousness of their situation, while he and Carter were both legally married to Eli. Exact nature of their relationship could still cause problems if the wrong people decided to make an issue of it. Carter confessed that he sometimes felt guilty about corrupting Eli, taking his innocence, even though Eli reassured him that corruption was the last thing that had happened. And Eli opened up about his lingering fear of abandonment, the worry that one day they'd wake up and decide he wasn't worth the trouble. These honest conversations, painful as they sometimes were, only strengthened their bond. They weren't hiding behind polite fictions or unspoken assumptions anymore. They were building something real on a foundation of truth and trust. And as winter deepened and they spent more time snowed in together, that foundation proved solid enough to weather any storm. They learned to fight productively, to disagree without threatening the core of their relationship, and to make decisions as a unit rather than individuals. By the time Christmas approached, the McKenna Ranch had been transformed, where it had once felt like a lonely, isolated outpost. It now felt like a Havana place, where three men could love each other freely, away from the judgment and expectations of the outside world. They decorated modestly, more for the joy of it than any real celebration, and exchanged simple gifts on Christmas morning. Carter gave Eli a beautiful leather-bound journal, encouraging him to write down his thoughts and feelings. Cade surprised him with a custom-made saddle, perfectly fitted to Eli's smaller frame, acknowledging him as a full partner in the ranch work. Eli's gifts to them were more modest, hand-knitted scarves that he'd been secretly working on for months. But the look on both their faces made him feel like he'd given them the world. They spent Christmas Day in comfortable companionship, cooking together and playing cards by the fire. That night, in the big bed they all shared, Cade proposed something that had been on his mind for a while. "I think we should make this official," he said, his tone serious. "Not the marriage that's already legal and binding, the three of us together. I want to have some kind of ceremony, even if it's just for us, where we all exchange vows, where Eli promises to us and we promise to each other, not just to him." Carter sat up, clearly intrigued by the idea. "Like a renewal of vows, but bigger?" he asked. Cade nodded. "Exactly. Something that acknowledges what we really are, not just two men married to a third, but three men committed to each other and to this life we're building." He looked at Eli, searching his face. "What do you think? Would that mean something to you?" Eli felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Would it mean something? It would mean everything." "Yes," Eli said, his voice thick. "I want that. I want us to make promises to each other that aren't about land or family obligations, but about love and commitment." They spent the rest of the night planning, deciding they'd do it at the spring thaw, when the valley was at its most beautiful. They'd write their own vows, create their own ritual, and bind themselves together in a way that was meaningful to them, regardless of what the law or society recognized. It felt right, this claiming of their own narrative, and Eli went to sleep, that night feeling more secure and loved than he ever had in his life. January brought bitter cold and long nights, but inside the ranch house, it was warm and full of life. They continued their pattern some nights, just two of them. Other nights all three together, but now there was an even deeper sense of partnership and understanding. Eli had grown into his role. It's no longer the uncertain young man who'd arrived 6 months ago, but a confident partner who held his own with both brothers. He offered opinions on ranch decisions, challenged them when he disagreed, and generally proved himself an invaluable part of their operation. One particularly memorable night, after a few glasses of whiskey by the fire, Carter got brave enough to ask a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Eli, do you have a preference between me and Cade?" Cade looked like he wanted to shush his twin, but curiosity clearly won out because he stayed silent, waiting for Eli's answer. Eli considered the question seriously, wanting to give an honest answer that wouldn't hurt either of them. "It's not about preference," he said finally. "It's about different needs being met in different ways. Carter, when I'm with you, I feel passion and excitement, and alive in a way that's almost overwhelming. You push me out of my comfort zone, make me braver and more adventurous." He turned to Cade. "When I'm with you, I feel safe and cherished and loved in this deep, steady way that grounds me. You make me feel like I'm worth taking care of, like I'm precious." He looked between them both. "I need both of you. You complement each other, and together, you give me everything I could ever want." "You complement each other, and together, you give me everything I could ever want." His answer seemed to satisfy them both, and the rest of the evening was spent in warm companionship that eventually led to the bedroom. That night was one of the times when they were all three together, and Eli marveled at how well they'd learned to work in tandem. There was no awkwardness anymore, no uncertainty about who should do what. They moved together like a single organism, their goal, Eli's pleasure, and their own. And when they finally collapsed in a satisfied heap, Eli felt a contentment so deep it scared him a little. February brought the first hints of spring, and with it, preparations for their vow renewal ceremony. They decided to do it at sunrise on the first day of March. When the snow would be melting and the first green shoots would be pushing through the earth, they'd go to a special spot on their property, a meadow that overlooked the valley, and speak their promises to each other with no witnesses but the land itself. It felt fitting. Somehow this was their life, their choice, and they didn't need anyone else's approval or blessing. Eli worked on his vows in secret, filling page after page in the journal Carter had given him until he had something that felt right. He didn't know what Cade and Carter were planning to say, and they'd all agreed to keep their vows private until the ceremony. The anticipation made the last few weeks of winter feel endless, but also precious. They were on the cusp of something new, another evolution in their relationship. And Eli felt ready for it in a way he never would have been 6 months ago. The night before the ceremony, they agreed to sleep apartly in the big bed alone, Cade and Carter in their old rooms. It felt strange after so many months of sleeping together, and Eli tossed and turned, missing the warmth of their bodies flanking his. But he understood the symbolism. Tomorrow they would come together anew, not out of legal obligation or gradual evolution, but out of deliberate choice. They were choosing each other, actively and consciously, and that made all the difference. When dawn broke on March 1st, Eli dressed carefully in his best clothes and made his way to the meadow. Cade and Carter were already there, having arrived separately so they could all approach this final leg together. The three of them stood in a triangle facing each other, and as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, they began to speak their vows. Carter went first, his usual intensity tempered with an unusual vulnerability as he promised to protect, to cherish, to support both Eli and Cade through whatever came. Cade spoke next, his words measured and heartfelt, promising partnership and patience, understanding and unconditional love. His vows acknowledged the unique nature of their relationship, the challenges they might face, and his commitment to working through all of it together. And then it was Eli's turn, and he pulled out the paper where he'd written his carefully crafted words. But when he looked at their faces, the paper suddenly felt inadequate. He folded it back up and spoke from his heart instead. 6 months ago, I came here a scared, uncertain boy who didn't believe he deserved love or happiness. Eli began, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. You two took that boy and helped him become a man, not by changing him, but by accepting him exactly as he was. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You were patient when I was difficult. You celebrated my victories and held me through my defeats." His voice cracked slightly, and he had to pause to compose himself before continuing. "Carter, you taught me that passion and tenderness aren't opposites, that you can burn bright and still be gentle. You pushed me to be brave, to take risks, to embrace all the parts of myself I'd been taught to hide. Cade, you showed me that love can be a safe harbor, a place to rest and be fully known. You gave me stability without stifling me, security without smothering me." Tears were streaming down his face now, but his smile was radiant. "I promise to love you both with everything I have, for as long as I live. I promise to be your partner in this life we're building. I promise to communicate honestly, to choose you every day, and to never take for granted the incredible gift you've given me, acceptance, belonging, home." By the time he finished, all three of them were crying, and the ceremony dissolved into a three-way embrace as the sun fully crested the horizon. They stood there in the meadow, holding each other as the world woke up around them. And Eli felt something settle deep in his soul. This was his family. This was his forever. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The weeks that followed their vow ceremony had a dreamlike quality, as if the three of them were floating in a bubble of contentment. The ranch work continued as always, but now there was an even deeper sense of partnership in everything they did. Decisions were made collectively. Tasks were divided according to preference and skill, and the whole operation ran more smoothly than it ever had. Eli found himself taking on more responsibility, particularly in the business side of things where his attention to detail complemented Cade's big picture planning. One afternoon in late March, Eli was in town picking up supplies when he overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. Two women were talking in hushed tones, clearly not realizing he was in the next aisle. "It's unnatural," one was saying, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Those McKenna twins and that boy they've got living with them. Everyone knows what's really going on out there." The other woman made a non-committal sound, and the first continued, "Mark my words, no good will come of it. That kind of sin always catches up with people." Eli felt ice flood his veins, and for a moment he was transported back to his childhood, to all the times he'd heard similar condemning words directed at people like him. His first instinct was to hide, to avoid confrontation, to pretend he hadn't heard. But then he thought about Carter's fierce protectiveness. It's about Cade's quiet dignity, about the vows they'd all just spoken. He thought about the life they were building, honest and true, and something hardened inside him. He walked around the corner and looked the first woman directly in the eye. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, his voice calm and leveled despite the anger simmering beneath. "If you have concerns about my family, I'd appreciate if you'd voice them to my face rather than gossiping in public." The woman had the decency to look embarrassed, her face flushing red. I didn't mean," she stammered, but Eli cut her off. "Yes, you did. And you're entitled to your opinions, but so am I. My husbands and I are happy. We're not hurting anyone, and we're contributing members of this community. If that's not enough for you, I suggest you spend more time worrying about your own life and less about ours." He turned and walked away before she could respond, his heart pounding, but his head held high. It was the first time he'd publicly claimed his relationship with both brothers, the first time he'd stood up for himself and his family in such a direct way. And while part of him waited for the sky to fall, another part felt liberated. When he got home and told Carter and Cade what had happened, he expected them to be worried or angry. Instead, Carter laughed with genuine delight and pulled him into a crushing hug. "That's my husband," he said proudly. Cade's smile was equally warm, and he kissed Eli's forehead with obvious affection. "I'm proud of you," Cade said simply, "for standing up for us, for yourself." That took courage. Eli felt warmth spread through his chest. He'd been defending his family, yes, but also defending himself, defending the life he'd chosen and the love he'd found. It felt good, this new confidence, and he realized he was no longer the scared boy who'd arrived at this ranch 7 months ago. He'd become someone stronger, someone capable of fighting for what mattered. The incident with Mrs. Henderson proved to be a turning point in how the town viewed them. Word spread about Eli's confrontation, and while there were still disapproving glances and whispered conversations, there was also a new respect. People might not understand their arrangement, but they could see the three of them were serious about their commitment. A few of the more progressive townspeople even went out of their way to express support, and Eli was surprised to discover they weren't as alone as he'd feared. April brought renewal to the valley, more ways than one. The ranch was thriving, their relationship was solid, and Eli felt more at home than he ever had in his life. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Carter voiced something that had clearly been on his mind. "I want a family," he said abruptly, and both Eli and Cade turned to look at him in surprise. "I mean, we are a family," he corrected, "but I want ... kids. Eventually, a legacy beyond just the ranch." It was something they hadn't really discussed, and Eli felt his stomach flip with a mixture of anxiety and unexpected excitement. How would that even work? He asked practically. And Cade Ever the planner launched into an explanation he'd clearly been thinking about for a while. Adoption was a possibility, though complicated given their situation. Or they could find a woman willing to carry a child for them, with proper legal arrangements to ensure everyone's rights were protected. It wouldn't be easy, but it also wasn't impossible. The conversation continued late into the night, all three of them sharing their thoughts and concerns about parenthood. Carter wanted the chaos and joy of children, was already imagining teaching kids to ride and work the ranch. Cade was more concerned about the practical aspects. Could they provide stable homes? How would they handle questions about their family structure? What kind of life could they offer a child? And Eli found himself surprised by how much he wanted it, to the chance to create a family. To give children the acceptance and love he'd been denied for so much of his life. They didn't make any decisions that night, agreeing it was too big a topic to rush, but the seed had been planted. And Eli found himself daydreaming about a future that included small voices and tiny feet running through the ranch house. It felt far off still, something to work toward rather than dive into immediately. But the possibility alone made his heart full. As spring progressed into early summer, life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. There were good days and hard days, easy conversations and difficult ones. But through it all ran a current of love and commitment that kept them grounded. Eli continued to grow into himself, becoming more confident and assured in his role. Carter's intensity mellowed slightly as his security in the relationship deepened. And Cade remained their steady anchor, the one who could always be counted on to bring perspective when emotions ran high. They made love in sunlit meadows and by firelight, sometimes with urgent passion and sometimes with lazy contentment. They laughed over shared meals and worked side by side under the vast Wyoming sky. They argued about everything from politics to the best way to repair a fence, but they always came back together. Because at the end of the day, they'd chosen each other not once in some ceremony, but every single day in 1,000 small ways. One particularly hot afternoon in June, Eli was working in the barn when both brothers appeared, looking mischievous. "We have a surprise for you," Carter announced. And before Eli could protest, they were leading him out to the meadow where they'd spoken their vows. There, someone had set up a small picnic blankets, and baskets of food and even a bottle of wine cooling in the stream. "What's all this?" Eli asked, touched by the gesture. Cade smiled, pulling him down to sit. "We realized we've been so focused on work and building the ranch that we haven't taken time just to enjoy each other. So we're taking the afternoon off." It was perfect, the three of them lounging in the sunshine, eating good food and talking about everything and nothing. Carter told ridiculous stories about their childhood that made Eli laugh until his sides hurt. Cade shared his dreams for the ranch's future, including ideas for expanding their operation. And Eli found himself opening up about his past in ways he hadn't before, sharing memories both painful and sweet. The afternoon stretched into evening, and as the stars came out, they lay together on the blankets, pointing out constellations and making wishes. "Thank you," Eli said softly, his head on Cade's chest and Carter's hand in his. "For this day, for this life, for everything." He felt both brothers squeeze him in response, and Carter's voice came warm through the darkness. "We should be thanking you," he said. You made us a family. Before you, Kate and I were just two brothers running a ranch. Now we're something more, something better." Cade made a sound of agreement, and Eli felt his eyes sting with happy tears. How had he gotten so lucky? How had he found his way here, to this perfect moment with these perfect men? The summer passed in a blur of heat and hard work, and stolen moments of tenderness. They fell into patterns and routines, but they never became complacent. Each of them made efforts to keep things fresh, to surprise each other, to never take their bond for granted. Eli learned that relationships, especially ones as complex as theirs, required constant attention and care. But he also learned that the work was worth it, that what they were building together was stronger than anything he could have created alone by the time August arrived, and they'd been together nearly a year. Eli could barely remember the uncertain, scared person he'd been when this all started. He'd become someone new, someone brave and confident and deeply loved. Someone who loved deeply in return. Standing on the porch one evening, watching Carter and Cade work together to repair a fence post, Eli realized that this was everything he'd ever wanted, everything he'd never dared hope for. He'd found his place in the world, and it was right here, between two men who saw him, accepted him, cherished him as the sun set over the valley. Painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Eli smiled. Their story was just beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, more moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. But there would also be joy and laughter and love, so much love that sometimes Eli could barely contain it all. They'd built something remarkable here, something that defied easy definition or societal expectations. They'd built a family, a home, a forever, and Eli couldn't wait to see what came next. But this was only the beginning. Their first year together had transformed them all, but the real tests of their unconventional family were yet to come. Would the arrival of unexpected visitors challenge everything they'd built? Could their love withstand the scrutiny of a world not ready to accept them? And what would happen when Carter's reckless decision put them all in danger? Part 2, coming soon. Did this story touch your heart? Want to see what happens next in Eli, Carter, and Cade's journey? Like this video if you felt the emotion. Subscribe to never miss Part 2. Comment Part 2 below to let us know you want the continuation. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more LGBTQ love stories that celebrate authentic relationships. Let's build a community where all love is celebrated